Jim Breslow. Find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Watch our YouTube channel, Hidden Truth Show. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on your podcast app. Here's Jim Breslow.
Welcome back to the Hidden Truth Show, What Happened in Palm Beach, our deep dive into the Epstein scandal. Our guest today may be the most knowledgeable person on the Epstein scandal, other than those actually involved in the crimes. Conchita Sarnoff is executive director of the Alliance to Rescue Victims of Trafficking. It's a Washington, D.C. organization whose mission is to raise awareness of human trafficking and end child sex trafficking. She's also a senior fellow at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service Human Trafficking Research Center. She was the first to expose the absurdly mild sentence that Epstein received in Florida in a Daily Beast article in 2010. She went on to become the foremost expert on Jeffrey Epstein and his sex trafficking ring. She authored the book Traffic King in 2016, in which she yanked back the curtain on Epstein's underworld, where children pay the ultimate price as victims. The story explores the darkest recesses of the corridors of power, from Harvard to the White House. The book exposed Epstein and the longest-running human trafficking case in U.S. legal history, a scandal she says is more significant than the Lewinsky and Watergate scandals combined. Before we get to our interview, if you've not already, please subscribe to and rate our show on your podcast app. And for a video of this interview, go to our YouTube channel, The Hidden Truth Show. Now, our interview with Conchita Sarnoff. The most obvious question just to start with is, everybody out there wants to know, did he kill himself or did he not? So let's just start with your opinion as to what you really think happened in prison.
Well, Jim, thank you for having me on your show. Let me just start with the fact that I received a phone call from an active federal agent a few days after Epstein's arrest. And the agent said to me two things. He will not make it to trial. There are towels on the inside. I became so concerned about these two statements that I immediately contacted the Washington Post. I also contacted the Attorney General's office. I spoke to Corey Amundsen, who is the head of the OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility. And I sent a letter to Martin Weinberg, one of Epstein's lead attorneys, and I copied Alan Dershowitz. And I basically told these gentlemen that I had received this phone call, that I had been perhaps forewarned, and that I would hope that they would secure him and make sure that, in spite of my feelings about Epstein and what he's done, which clearly was criminal, he needed to be alive to go to that trial and face his victims. So I gave this information to these people. And within literally days, there was the first alleged suicide attempt. Not 45 days later, Epstein was found dead. So, in my opinion, I do not believe that Epstein committed suicide.
Who was it that alerted you? Somebody from...
I'm sorry, I cannot reveal my source, but I will tell you the person is an active federal agent. And
do you believe he was alerting you that he thought that Epstein was likely to commit suicide or was likely to be killed?
No. I believe he was alerting me that Epstein would be killed. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So the question then is, if you don't believe he committed suicide, how did this occur? Because he is alone in a locked cell. There are cameras, although there was nothing on the cell at the time, apparently, but there are cameras throughout the prison. I've been asking people who believe that he did not commit suicide, okay, well then walk me through a scenario as to how this could have happened. Who killed him, and how could they have possibly done it?
Well, I certainly don't have the answer as to who killed him, and I don't even wish to speculate because it's much too dark for me to do so, and perhaps even dangerous. That's number one. Number two, it is very unusual that two of the guards who were supposed to guard him both fell asleep. It is also highly unusual that a man who had been placed on suicide watch had been within 6 days removed from suicide watch. It is also most unusual that his cellmate, the former policeman, Nicholas, I can't remember his last name, family name, was also removed from his cell, Jim, the night prior to his alleged suicide. Mm-hmm. All these circumstances are just too bizarre. And the fact that I received a phone call from a federal agent to tell me that he wouldn't make it to trial, that there were towels on the inside, just to me, really gave me a whole different meaning of why and what and how deep and how complex this case has been over the past 10 years. I mean, I have been investigating the case, as you know, since 2009, and I broke the case wide open in 2010. And then after many struggles, I published the book in 2016. And I can tell you, there has been so much pushback on the Epstein case. And as someone who has had no institutional protection whatsoever, because I'm not a journalist per se, I do not work for any publication, nor have I ever worked for a publication. I've only contributed to different publications. It has been an uphill battle to even publish what I have published so far.
And you also state that you were offered bribes.
I was at one point at the very beginning when I started to write the book, I was offered a bribe by someone who knew Epstein, who was very close to Epstein and knows me as well. And so when we had breakfast, this person asked me to have breakfast with him in Florida. I was in Miami investigating the Epstein case, and I agreed, not knowing what the question was, the reason for the breakfast. And he proceeded to tell me, what would it be? What would you reconsider stopping to write the book if you were given $5 million? At which point I really just laughed because I thought it was just, the whole thing was so ludicrous.
So he was essentially a friend or representative of Epstein?
I don't know. He could have been representing Epstein. He could have been representing the Clintons. He could have been representing any of those people who I've identified in my book. But I'm assuming, and this is just an assumption, of course, that he was either representing Epstein or the Clintons, one of the two, because neither of the two wanted this story published.
Well, finish.
No, and in fact, when I brought the case, I attempted to bring the case to the attention of the Obama administration, which I thought would be very proactive, because I always knew from the former Labor Secretary Acosta that this case, the Epstein case, could be refiled in another state. Because not only had Acosta told me in a letter back in 2011, which I published in the Daily Beast, Acosta had told me repeatedly that a new jurisdiction could always indict him. And sure enough, the 2019 arrest in July 6 was exactly that. If you look at the charges against Epstein when they arrested him Saturday, July 6, they were two old 2005 charges. So Acosta was right. Any state, be it New York, New Mexico, California, or the United States Virgin Islands, because they were new jurisdictions, could have arrested Epstein at any point between 2010 and 2019. So why did they wait 10 years? Why did New York wait 10 years to arrest Epstein? That is what we need to find out.
Well, I'm going to assume you're going to say the Clinton connection, because if you've got Obama in office with Hillary as the Secretary of State and the likely next Democratic president. They're going to not prosecute and protect. Now you've got an entirely new administration with no particular love for the Clintons, and in fact, quite the opposite. Is that your theory as to why things changed?
I believe so. Yes, I do believe that.
So we're talking about whether he's the head of the snake or not. Is there someone above him in this operation, as far as you know?
Okay, well, in terms of the sex operation, which is what I'm assuming you're talking about, the sex ring, correct?
Yes.
I think that he had his own sex ring, so he is the head of that snake. However, he wasn't alone, and I'm not so sure that he was the head of it, and I'll explain it why. Because, it wasn't just for him. He was bringing in a lot of very powerful people. So even though he was consuming, and obviously he was a predator, I think there were other predators, perhaps more powerful than him, perhaps richer than him, who were also part of this. But, I have my doubt, Jim, as to whether I don't believe that Epstein created this sex ring in order to extort other men. I don't believe that's what he did. I believe he was simply a degenerate and a pedophile, and he found himself mixed up with a group of very powerful men who were equally as degenerate and equally as powerful, and they all participated in the same activity.
Mm-hmm. And there certainly could be other sources of children that some of these people are tapping into, such as Prince Andrew.
Yes, and MC Squared. Remember, MC Squared was a very important source for Epstein, and it was a legitimate vehicle in which Epstein was able to bring and transport and hire these girls under the guise of modeling. In fact, one of the procurers, Nadia Marcinkova, was brought in through MC Squared, and she's now a pilot in South Florida. She was his girlfriend, if you want to call her that, and she also had relations with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and several victims claimed that Nadia participated in their sexual activities as well, and she lived with Epstein. Unlike most of the girls, Nadia Marcinkova lived with Epstein.
So again, you don't believe there's any blackmail involved, because one of the things swirling around is a Mossad connection.
Right. Do I believe there's blackmail? Sorry, there's this thing that's... So I believe that Epstein had a lot of information on a lot of people. Certainly had enough information on Ehud Barak, the former prime minister, that might have hurt him. I have no doubt about that. But, who better than the Mossad to have information on other people? I mean, I'm pretty sure that Ehud Barak had equally as much, if not more, information on Epstein than Epstein had on Barak.
So they theoretically were aware of Epstein and could have paid him to help get dirt on certain people.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, I lost the connection. Could you repeat that, please?
Well, I guess the question is, what was Mossad likely aware, at minimum, aware of Epstein, aware of what he was doing?
Oh, absolutely. Well, the moment that he does business with the prime minister, of course they're aware. They're more than aware. And remember, Epstein was of Jewish faith. I mean, he was a donor. He obviously was very friendly with Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz was his attorney, and Alan Dershowitz, I'm sure, is very well known by the Mossad. And he surrounded himself with people. And Ghislaine Maxwell, her father, was also someone who was very identified with the Mossad, as was Ghislaine Maxwell. So Epstein surrounded himself with individuals and friends and associates who were well known to the Mossad. Yes. So the answer to your question is absolutely yes.
George Mitchell seemed to be kind of a surprising name to come
Yes.
up in all of this.
Shocking.
How do you think he was involved in this?
Well, from what I've read, because I never interviewed George Mitchell, I have not yet interviewed him. Let me just say that. So from what I've read, he was part of that circle and accepted donations. And when you accept donations from the devil, that's what you get.
What about Leslie Wexner's role in the whole thing?
Oh, no. I think he plays a major role. I mean, I think, first of all, Leslie and Epstein had an intimate relationship for many, many years. I believe that they were very close friends. Wexner, as everyone knows, was the one who basically rescued Epstein when he was fired from Bear Stearns, I told you earlier. And Wexner was the one who provided Epstein with the first $1 billion to set up his firm in New York, and then who also gave him many, many assets, and transferred many of his assets to Epstein. And Epstein was on Leslie Wexner's board for years. He actually was someone that was, he created quite a stir within Mr. Wexner's board because they didn't understand the relationship. They didn't want him around. In fact, Mrs. Wexner, Bella Wexner, I never interviewed her, but I read in several documents that she was quite upset at the relationship that her son Leslie had with Epstein and didn't quite understand why Mr. Wexner gave so much access to Mr. Epstein.
Was Wexner a pedophile, or is he?
Well, I have never had a victim come to me and say that Mr. Wexner is a pedophile. Never. I have had a source, which I would prefer not to name right now, even though he was interviewed by the FBI back in 2010. This source, who knows Mr. Wexner and knew Mr. Epstein, said that when he was redecorating the USVI house, that he was told by Mr. Epstein to decorate one of the bedrooms in blue and one of the bedrooms in pink for children. Make of that what you wish. But that Mr. Wexner was there when this happened. And, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean that Mr. Wexner knew or saw. But
certainly you think they were close enough, though, that Wexner was aware that he was running some type of a child sex
what
ring.
do you think? If you give somebody $1 billion and you give them about 5 properties worth millions of dollars, don't you think you're going to be close to that person?
Yeah. So he could be in trouble. And is it Abercrombie and Fitch is one of his companies, right?
Yes, it is.
They're the ones that were putting very young models in their catalogs.
Well, you don't have to go further. You look at Victoria's Secret. Look at the whole concept of Victoria's Secret and the modeling, the models, the angels. Yes.
Okay, what about the Anthony Weiner connection? He liked young girls.
No, but there was no connection between. In fact, I found it shocking that Mrs. Clinton hands over 30,000 emails to Uma Abedin, who then somehow transfers it to Anthony Weiner, given the investigation, the sexting investigation that was going on, and they appear on Anthony Weiner's laptop. I mean, that to me was shocking, only because of a lack of security measures, but you didn't find in that trove of emails anything related to Epstein. And I'm pretty sure that, I know that Mrs. Clinton, Secretary Clinton back then, was fully aware. She knew Epstein had been indicted and arrested and sentenced and registered as a level 3 sex offender. So I don't think that she would advise Uma Abedin to advise her husband to associate with Epstein.
So what is your understanding as to where those 30,000 emails are today?
Well, nobody has investigated that. I certainly haven't done that either. So I cannot give you uh, an educated response to that. If and when I do, I will let you know. But that's not my investigation today.
So you stated that you think that he may have been killed. It may not have been a suicide. So who would have wanted him dead?
Well, as I said before, there are several individuals who might have wanted him, who might have wanted to help him disappear. I mean, look, he was going to get, if he went to trial, chances are that he would have been found guilty and sentenced to perhaps 40 years. Chances are that Epstein knew too much about too many powerful people. We know that, as Virginia said in a deposition, we are in each other's pockets, which means that I have secrets that you have and you have secrets that I have. And so there was too much of that, and it already was too far gone and too much media exposure. And I think it was a number of people, I think it was just too coincidental that two policemen went to sleep. And perhaps the investigation that should follow is the bank accounts of these policemen. Let's see how much money appears in their account within the next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a very risky maneuver to kill him in prison, because there is going to be an investigation to find out if that happened, who did it. So now you've got somebody who's an accomplice to murder.
Absolutely. But, the cameras all of a sudden were off. There were no cameras.
Yeah.
Right? So the cameras are turned off. The two policemen go to sleep. The thing is, who suggested or who told the policemen to go to sleep? Both of them. And perhaps the investigation should follow that line.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting that the allegations brought in the New York case were essentially the same allegations, 2005 to 2008. What is your belief and understanding as to what he was up to once he got out of his 1-year prison term in Florida? Did he go right back to all the same activities? And if so, how come there was no charges for that?
Absolutely. Well, that's the big question. I wrote about it. I was silenced for a long time, Jim. I knocked on many doors asking for an investigation in New York. I asked for an investigation in California. Nobody paid attention to me over the years. I wrote in several news papers, op-eds concerning Epstein and the ongoing onslaught of victims. The New York Post took photographs. The New York Daily News took photographs constantly of him in and out of his house. So the question is, why did the Manhattan District Attorney, prior to 2019, why didn't they start another investigation? That non-prosecution agreement was clear. Any other state could have begun the same investigation that the Southern District began a year ago before his arrest July 6th. So why didn't they do that back in 2010? Because the rate of recidivism is very high in pedophiles, as you know, and it grows exponentially as the years pass. So the fact that Epstein was continuing to be photographed with very young girls should have alerted the authorities, certainly in Palm Beach and most certainly in New York.
Yeah, so much for registering as a sex offender. I mean, at the end of the day, what does that really accomplish?
Right, obviously not. In his case, nothing. If his name was Joe Smith and he was worth $50,000 or had a job that paid him $150,000, he would be in jail. But clearly and sadly, and I really mean this, sadly, there is evidently two systems of justice in our country, one for the rich and one for the poor. And that is sad, because in cases like Epstein, it doesn't help victims. It actually places many children at a great disadvantage.
What do you think of the case that Katie Johnson, I think that's a made-up name for the case, where she alleged that Trump had raped her, and then that case was dismissed. Not many people are talking about that case.
Oh, exactly. Well, I investigated that case pretty thoroughly. Number one, I think she is not telling the truth. Number two, I think the case was filed April 18th, I believe, or April 16th, forgive me, 2016 in Lancaster, California. And it was dismissed on a technicality. And then it was refiled by an attorney she hired, Thomas Meager, a patent attorney in Princeton, New Jersey, and it was filed in September 16th, and it was dismissed November 4th of 2016. And it was dismissed voluntarily, meaning she asked to dismiss the case. I believe that her allegations were just, look, I am always on the side of victims. I tend and want to believe victims rather than defendants. But in her particular case, it was too extraordinary. Just the way she phrased, the way she accused them, both men, and the way she talked about what President Trump and Epstein together, not independently of each other, but together, did to her, didn't make any sense, and it was not compatible with either Mr. Epstein's history or President Trump's history. So I dismissed that case. When I spoke to the lawyer for the victims, Brad Edwards, and I said, Brad, do you want to take on this case? Because this, the moment I heard about the case in April, I was just about to publish my book. And so it came to my attention, and I immediately called Brad Edwards, and he wouldn't take the case. And the fact that Brad Edwards would not take the case, to me, was the biggest red flag, because he had been, he had been a lead lawyer for these defendants. And
speaking of Brad Edwards, what do you know about his law partner, Scott Rothstein? Are you familiar with that name?
Yes, I am very much familiar with that. Well, Scott Rothstein, even though I didn't interview him or meet him, I know Brad, but I never met Rothstein. I know he was a sort of, a swindler of sorts in South Florida, and he created a Ponzi scheme and used Brad Edwards. I believe that he truly used Brad to profit and to benefit from the Epstein case that Brad brought to him, because prior to their association, Brad was a solo attorney and realized that the Epstein case was just such a big case that he needed a large firm to sustain the case. And so he partnered with Rothstein, but Rothstein was evidently, he's in jail. He wasn't a very honest man. And so it derailed, and Epstein used their partnership to basically point fingers and manipulate the case as if Brad was the one that was the culprit here and the swindler. And in fact, it was not Brad Edwards. It was Rothstein.
Wow. That sounds like its own movie right there.
Yep. There are a lot of movies here.
Yeah. This is going to be a multi-year miniseries. So yes. Is it right that Rothstein was accused of sex trafficking?
No, I did not hear that at all. I'm not familiar with that allegation.
Okay. Only a Ponzi scheme that he's now in jail for.
Yes, but it was money. What he would do is he would solicit investors to invest in his clients, meaning in his legal cases. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Epstein, what he did was he told different investors, listen, this case is a done deal. It's wrapped up. We need $50,000. I'm just throwing a figure. I don't remember the figure exactly, but he requested an investment from his clients, and they would give him that investment, and then he would basically draw on that money and give the clients the investors an interest in the firm. And of course, it was all a Ponzi scheme to make money. I mean, he was truly extraordinary what he created.
And ultimately had some connection to Epstein, you believe?
Well, no, he didn't have because Rothstein didn't have a connection with Epstein. It was Brad Edwards who was handling the Epstein case. He was
Sure.
defending victims, but he brought the Epstein case to Rothstein because he needed a firm, and Rothstein had a pretty substantial, at that time, firm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Okay, last question for you is it involves an Epstein bodyguard, I believe bodyguard, that died in prison.
Oh, not bodyguard. It was his house manager, Alfredo Rodriguez.
Okay.
This man who I met many times and spoke to him and his wife, Patricia Dunn. Quite sad, very sad story. So his house manager was, he seemed to me a very upright, moral man in the sense that he did not like what he saw in terms of the little girls coming in and out of the house. And he told his wife, and there was a cook, I believe her name was Betty. She was one of Epstein's cooks in his Palm Beach house. And both of them together were quite upset at the debauchery going on. And he had to clean up the sex toys used by Epstein with the girls. And so one day he saw a car sitting, it was dusk, and he saw a car sitting outside of the house. And he took the opportunity to call the police and told the police that there was a strange car sitting outside of Mr. Epstein's house. And of course, that strange car belonged to one of the girls. And so the police questioned the girls. Nothing happened because at that time there was no investigation. But Epstein obviously was alerted and was concerned and used that incident to fire Rodriguez. He then accused Rodriguez of stealing from him. And so then Rodriguez takes a deposition. And because Epstein obviously at that time was not under investigation, he told a lot of the Palm Beach residents about Rodriguez and what a thief he was. And so Rodriguez couldn't get a job. And Rodriguez had always been a butler and a house manager. And so he couldn't find other work in Palm Beach. So he actually got involved with the wrong people, cousins of his or family, close to family members. And the family members were transporting weapons, and they put a number of weapons in the trunk of his car. And when he got to his house, the police stopped him, and because he was driving the vehicle, they arrested him. But this was after he was deposed because of the Epstein case, and after Rodriguez tried to sell what he called the Little Black Book, which was the directory of addresses and information on that Epstein held. But the weird thing is, because the detective who actually arrested Rodriguez was friendly with me at the time and said to me, you know, the Department of Justice is accusing and blaming Rodriguez for selling a little black book, the directory, for $50,000 and for withholding information when, according to this private investigator, he said the Department of Justice already had the information of the black book. In fact, when they raided the house, they found multiple, quote, black books because the black book was really just a sheet. There were multiple sheets of computerized names and addresses stapled together. It wasn't really a black book. It was just 100 sheets of paper with names and addresses of people he knew. So it was pretty odd, right? That the Department of Justice, that USAO would accuse this poor man of obstructing justice and not giving them the little black book and trying to sell it for $50,000 when in fact they already had that information.
And so that's what he went to jail for, was obstruction of justice. But what about the weapons in the trunk? That had nothing to do with it?
The second arrest. That was the second charge. So he went to jail. Well, he was indicted on the first charge, but I believe he was given some sort of, he wasn't given jail time. He was given community service. And then when they caught him with the weapons, with the guns in his trunk, then they arrested him.
Is that an Epstein setup? Weapons in the trunk?
No, I think he really was desperate for work. You know, he had a wife and he had children and he was desperate to get work. And, he just fell in the wrong hands with the wrong people. And, but, this man was truly a victim. I mean, truly a victim of
And if you're
circumstance.
suspicious of Epstein's death in prison, shouldn't you be even more suspicious of Rodriguez's death in prison?
Well, he died of cancer. He was actually, I knew because I was talking to him at the time, and I was talking to his wife, Patricia Dunn. He died not in jail. He died right after he was released from prison in Florida, and he was diagnosed with a very serious form of cancer, and he died pretty much right away.
Fascinating. Well, thanks for setting the record straight on that and just about everything else. You are the true Jeffrey Epstein expert, like it or not.
Goodness. I want to be known for other things.
Well, hopefully we're helping to expose not what he did, but what as you point out is going on extensively around the world. Epstein's shedding a light on it that I'm sure you hope is going to shed a light on a lot of other things.
Yes, I do. And Jim, thank you for being a light, because it is your light that is going to help not me selfishly create the Human Trafficking Research Center at Georgetown University. That is my goal in life, to create that center and open it so students can learn about human trafficking, and we can help Congress create the right laws, but also to open safe houses across the world. And you are a light in that story, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Conchita. And in fact, I know that you referenced there's already been a law passed under the Trump administration that resulted in Backpage.com getting shut down, right?
Yes, and I did a lot of work on that, and now I'm working with Congress. I've already written to several senators to help pass a new law that regulates modeling agencies, so we can bring down modeling agencies like MC Squared and owners like Jean-Luc Brunel and stop them from trafficking our children. So that's the next piece of legislation I'm working on now.
Thank you to Conchita Sarnoff. One post note, she noted that Attorney Barr told her that he would pursue this case even if he had to recuse himself. I looked into that after we spoke, and what she's referring to is the fact that Barr was part of the same law firm, Kirkland and Ellis, that some of the attorneys, including Ken Starr, were part of when they helped negotiate that plea deal for Epstein. So Barr was indicating that he might have to recuse himself from any prosecution. So far, Barr has not, and apparently is going after Epstein, but that is yet to be determined exactly how far this investigation will go. We will continue following the Epstein matter with our future episodes. Also, regarding Conchita Sarnoff, if you would like to support her cause, you can go to her website at conchitasarnoff.com. That's conchitasarnoff.com. We'll put that up on our website and on Facebook. Thank you to our producer, Michael Parker. We'll be back next week with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.